So we're back for a panel discussion on sustainable development, sustainability. I have with me Pauline de VALLIÈRES. Hello. Hello. You're Sustainable Insurance Manager at SCOR. So you've been looking at sustainable development for a very long time. I mean, you're not very old, but we'll take a historical view. And then we have Andrew Wilson. You're head of research at BRS. Absolutely. And very kindly, you're speaking French today. We'll see. Congratulations on your French. So the question behind this panel discussion is how to get shipping into motion towards sustainability. This morning, I thought that what was said was very optimistic, very committed. Maybe we'll be a bit less enthusiastic in this discussion, but I count on you to be sincere and take stock very honestly of the situation. It's not already an already won battle. Is shipping going fast enough and as quickly, as far enough? And so my first question, looking at Pauline, what are we talking about? Sustainability, what is that? Very often it's used to mean the environment. So concretely, what is it? Pauline agreed to give us a quick definition. Yes, I'll try. You all hear about sustainability and so on. You've been hearing about it for quite a few years and more now, be it at work, in your car, or at home. But now when talking about sustainability in a company, there's this economic notion that is very important you shouldn't lose sight of. So when talking about sustainability now, there are the four important pillars that are the environment, social matters, governance, and the economy. The aim is so that now we can get our companies running and meeting your needs and our needs of today, whilst keeping in mind future generations so that they too, in a few years, can have access to sustainability thanks to what we're putting in place now. Very often it seems to be contradictory with the economy, but you've immediately put sustainability, economic sustainability, in context. That's profitability. People tend to forget about it in what they say, don't they? Well, increasingly companies try to put that back at the center to make things concrete. But what Christian Boucher said, for us to look for profitability, we need to remember the economic parameter that's not to be forgotten. In my introduction, I said that you'd been looking at that for a very long time. So if we try to take a step back, have you seen a change in the last 10 years, roughly? What was the tipping point and why? It seems obvious now to have 2 or 3 discussions on that. But even last year, we were wondering, should we, could we? What was the tipping point for you? Well, I hope that in a few years that will even embedded in all discussions. There won't be any specific discussion about it. It will be intrinsic. Well, there's an explanation I really liked that said that sustainability was not the icing on the cake. It's the whole cake. Yes, that's the ethos that we want to work on. But indeed, 15 years ago, I think that a lot of you will remember, we were talking more about the social aspect with marine conventions. There was the Ballast Convention. We were negotiating it. That was a breakthrough with biodiversity. There was, back then I was at CMA CGM, there were more and more big clients that were looking at these questions, that audited our boats on their environmental aspects. And without this audit, the client wouldn't buy any containers. So that was really important. That was the beginning. You could already feel the issue of sulfur with IMO 2020 and CO2, whether we should have a tax, whether we should have carbon credits. And so you can see that it all took time to reach fruition. And in 15 years, it has accelerated. It has accelerated because now you've got more and more transparency and access to data, I think. Andrew, have you got the same analysis? Has it accelerated over the last 15 years? Not quite. I fully agree with Pauline's point about container ships, these audits are very important. But if you look at the other ship segments, like tankers or bulk carriers, all the boats that transport fossil fuels, you can see that it's a bit different. And here there's a bit less pressure. So you can see that some ship owners have tried to be a bit more sustainable, a bit greener, so to speak. But if you look at ship owners, you should see that it's not one size fits all. We are one of the biggest marine brokers in the world, and with our 23 offices in the world, we are in talks with any number of ship owners, small and big. And I can see that there's a real difference with small ship owners. For them, sustainability is rather a matter of economics. Will they still be around in 5, 10, or 20 years? Not even 50. So here, they're not necessarily concerned with the environment. To them, it's rather about profitability. So it's a little bit different. Pauline, in all these changes, can you really say that that's because these various topics are better and better identified as risk factors? Yes, I think earlier we talked about the fact of looking at the whole cake and not just the icing or the cherry on top. What we can see now is that if you take the three pillars, E, S, and G, very roughly, but for all of you to be convinced that you should get down to it, when talking about the environment in maritime shipping, you're talking about pollution. Take two similar ships, same route, same capacity, a similar ship that pollutes more than the other. A priori, you may wonder about its operationality, about engine maintenance and crew training. Quite clearly, everyone knows that a ship that's less well maintained will probably have more accidents. Take governance, the G part. Even now in shipping, you can have exotic countries, either in terms of funding countries, or then the companies managed in another country, the crew comes from another country, and so in your risk analysis you have 10 different countries, and you may wonder about communication, how everything communicates together. You can see that on your own team. A team that doesn't communicate well will have more risk. And then about the social part, it's even easier to analyze. If you have a crew that's less well trained or not trained at all, especially with the new technology available now, whether you're talking about the environment or not, that multiplies the risk factors. So yes, ESG is a risk factor that should really come into play in the risk analysis, and it's exciting as soon as you start discussing it with ship owners so that you can understand the environment in which you're operating. Andrew, today in the field, are you seeing a risk reduction? No, rather risk increase. If I look at the world now, already we've talked about geopolitics, the environment and so on. There are a lot of things that increase risk. And right now there is a huge risk, which is the oil shipping with the so-called gray fleet. The fleet that's fairly old. There are issues with insurance, issues with certifications, and I think that 6 weeks ago, the maritime world was lucky, but there was a tanker that sank near Singapore that was on ballast, and that was a great tanker. And I think that if there was an accident with an old tanker in the Hanoi or Hormuz or Malacca Straits, there would be a huge problem. And don't forget, although I'm defending the maritime world, it's one of the most efficient ways of transporting goods. Still, if you look at the bunker that's burnt by ships today, we're still talking about oil, and these are the most polluting refined products. The fuel oil has 3.5% sulfur. And if you look at, for instance, in West Africa, the fuel oil they burn in the engines there, it has 0.05%. So it's a fairly big pollutant. So I agree with Pauline. There has been a lot of progress in the last 20 years, but there's still a very, very long way to go. A lot of things to do to still reduce the emissions, not just decarbonization, but pollution traces behind ships. The recent news, has it changed the deal? I'm thinking about two things here. Of course, the war in Ukraine that has created tension, but also the recent news, not just COVID, but the post-COVID recovery that meant that we were ready to get any boat on the sea.
I don't think there was such thing as a COVID effect, except perhaps for the graph we saw earlier with the huge growth in container ships. But there you have it. We can survive with these really high rates of container ships. But I would say that the war in Ukraine has truly changed it all. Looking back 18 months ago, there were less than 200 ships in the gray fleet. Now you're looking at 750. But where did these 500-odd ships come from? Well, these gray ships, up until a few years ago, should have been just destroyed and removed, but they were actually sold by private ship owners. For example, more specifically, Greek ship owners. So these ships had reached an old age, and they should have been just being removed, and now they're front and center. In your opinion, what should be done to improve the situation? What do we need to work on? As Andrew said, the road ahead is long, and there's plenty to do, so it's quite exciting. Three main things I would say: to include ESG issues, to make sure that our maritime world is more integrated in that perspective. First of all, we need to decarbonize, do less harm through technological solutions. And then decarbonating is all very well and good, but you need to develop at the same time. And our world is full of opportunities, so we need to invest. We need to be daring. We need to go there. And then one last pillar, commitment. We need to commit. We need to communicate, speak amongst ourselves. Doing something on your own is already a good step in the right direction, but it's such a global problem. We really need to act together in order to decarbonize, protect biodiversity, develop opportunities, and be committed. We organized a roundtable last year on the Poseidon principles. Does it work? Yes. It's only the start of that story. Poseidon principles. We inspired ourselves from the banking sector, and the very first results were published this year. The objective is to collect CO2 data from ship owners, which they're supposed to communicate in any case. So it's not adding any extra workload on them. So we collect that data with ship owners and assess it in order to decarbonize. And the metrics will be a right step for more transparency. Okay, so decarbonization, that's all very well and good. But what if we talk about sustainability, and what about the G in ESG as well? What needs to be done? Well, the S and G pillars generally speaking, are rather well taken into consideration by our European companies due to regulations and the covenants signed by our companies. But when it comes to the G pillar, I would say that you would need to discuss with your clients. Well, first of all, in-house, do take a look at what you do in-house in this respect. And second, you need to speak to your clients about what they do with regards to the retention rate for their crews. Also in terms of governance, how are joint ventures made to make more progress. Andrew, in your opinion, what are the concrete actions which may be taken to improve the situation? That's a really good question, but I would say that governments need to provide more support, not just the French government, but overall. When I spoke about risks, well, if I am to put myself in the shoes of ship owner, when you speak about decarbonization and risks, today, ship owners are faced with huge risks. If they want to order a ship, for example, a VLCC, you're looking at least $120 million. The prices have completely skyrocketed, unprecedented prices, and yet they're not sure whether that asset will be sustainable and they'll be able to operate it for 10 or 15 years. They need at least 15, perhaps even 20. And right now, the situation is a little bit conflicting in the sense that when a ship owner needs to make their orders, but they have absolutely no clarity, no support in making that decision. So my concern is we're entering a world where ships will be older and older because there are no new orders. The sector has truly mobilized in favor of decarbonization, but tankers and the rest of them, not at all. So I would say that in the next 5 or 10 years, there will be that question of sustainability and profitability, and ships will need to be operated for 20 plus years because there will not be any new ship being ordered. So this is a call to the governments and to the IMO so that they bring more clarity on the way forward in terms of decarbonization. I believe we have enough time to take 1 or 2 questions in the room. So if anyone here would like to ask their question, you're very welcome. Post-meal, post-lunch. I have a question, as a matter of fact, in very practical terms. And here I'm speaking to the insurer. There are some for those that have been making the least progress in terms of pollution. In the short term, is there a risk that they might need to spend more money in their insurance? For the moment, in full transparency, we have no idea. But will those who are doing the worst, will they be paying the most? Or those who are doing the best, will they be paying the least? Let's first of all try to identify this in the first place. And for a number of insurance companies, and SCOR would be part of them, you need to measure. And to measure and compare, and to be able to say to your clients, well, look, don't go and get an insurance policy with someone else because it's cheaper or not. But this is the situation in the market. This is where we're headed. Basically, the idea is to support them. Almost a technical solution, but I'll try to frame this in a technical manner. Europe is officially working on legislation to make sure that everyone can make progress with a CSRD. So the idea would be to produce figures to assess all of these issues. Where does the maritime sector stand in all of this? Do we have any figures that we can speak of? Well, I believe this is still under development, but the taxonomy is up on the way and you'll all be concerned. This will be relevant for all of you. To identify in any company's business the green share of your business, and maritime sector will be no stranger to this. So with very specific definitions for cargo specifically, there will be a number of provisions. The maritime sector is a share of this when it comes to CSRD reporting, but all of this is still under development, unfortunately. Andrew, turning over to you. Training. Concretely, are companies trained enough? Are employees trained enough? So that, as some people have said, we can truly take charge of that issue. Well, I would say that in the past 10 years, you have ship owners looking for certain profiles they would not have been interested in the past. Digitalization, first of all. There are more people trained in digital technologies to comply with the reporting requirements. We also spoke of CO2 emissions, so on and so forth. But we're also looking at, as we said this morning, route optimization. So ship owners are using technologies now to, at the end of the day, earn more money, of course, but also to be on the forefront. Every ship owner, I believe, is scared of just lagging behind everyone else. So they're always looking for new profiles. Access Marine, for example, is doing lots in this sense to boost digitalization and help ship owners get on the that bandwagon. So I would say that this has been a true turning point. Yes, sir.
My name is Kingsley Kwala from Still Fresh, Cameroon. So thank you very much for the conversations that you've had. I think the work around ESG as far as ships are concerned is really clear. I'd like to find out if there's any meaningful work that is going on around cargo, especially cargo claims when it comes to ESG. Is that something that you can talk about?
So I'm really not a specialist on the cargo side, but I know that you have plenty of working group trying to evaluate with, for example, the green corridor or things like that to put in value the cargo that would be best or less polluting for the environment. But unfortunately, sorry, I'm not a specialist for this one.
I think you can ask the question another time for the round table that is just after this one. You can. Pascal, you had a question.
J'ai vraiment une question très
I have a very practical question for Pauline. As an insurer, do you have enough hindsight thanks to the data we now have? Can we be sure that the ship owners are companies with ESG policies and have better ratios? Unfortunately, we do not know quite the answer to that question just yet. I mean, before COVID, we were still working on the basis of scanned documents. So we're making slow progress, but sure progress. And so we'll see whether that loss ratio will be improved henceforth. And that stands for the maritime sector, but also for other sectors. For the moment, the studies have not yielded any streamlined results. what can people do to accelerate that process on a personal level, perhaps, or vis-a-vis their entity? Well, on both levels, I believe both would need to be taken on board. Anyone committed in these questions personally will be more easily committed at work. Now's the time to really be interested in this, because as Andrew said, it's a matter of training, but also recruitment. At SCOR, for example, all the new talents we recruit need to be well versed in the matter. And the same applies for investors, but you all know this. And of course, it makes everything more interesting and exciting, being able to analyze your business from a different standpoint by asking cross-cutting questions, by connecting the dots and seeing that everything is integrated at the end of the day. I would say that it gives even more purpose to what you do. And as we discussed just before this roundtable, we all have that net zero by 2050 agenda, and you have these tipping points along the way with ocean acidification, which will be a true tipping point, which will be irreversible. And maybe that's a tipping point which, as maritime experts, we feel particularly concerned by. So that means we need to get cracking on that as of now. What about you, Andrew? Well, I'm not sure I would have any piece of advice to share with you, but I quite agree with what was just said on net zero. But for as cynical or as realistic as I might be, hopefully I'm more realistic than cynical, but I do not see quite enough movement towards net zero. I see so many studies talking about net zero and that whole agenda, but concretely when I speak with ship owners and when I speak more broadly with players in the energy sector, I can see that they are still on the same road towards increasing fossil fuel consumption. And I really do not see how we can change that curve. I mean, hopefully we can, but to be quite honest with you, for the moment, I have not seen quite enough effort put into this just yet. When I heard the conclusions in the last COP, it was more like the developing world was saying, hold on a second, we do not want to sacrifice our economic growth for the environment. And that was quite scary for me and my children. So hopefully we can change that curve. But again, governments throughout the world need to really act on this. They need clear strategies and legislations. So that's not really a recommendation. Well, I actually wanted wanted to ask you a question, whether you were an optimist or a pessimist here. So clearly you're pessimistic. And as far as I'm concerned, well, I think one should be pessimistic. And the autonomy level, so at IMO level, every couple of years, there are committees dedicated to the environment, and the MEPC is the IMO's committee dedicated to the environment, and their objective is to reduce the emissions by 50% by 2050. And that's not particularly in line with the Paris Agreement. And this summer, we'll see what the discussions will go, and maybe some governments, will be a little bit more responsive. Thank you to the both of you.